In fact, we are very privileged, rather we are very honored to have Meena Seshu with us. In fact, I had seen Meena's play almost 10-15 years back at Prithvi, and since then you had really enthralled me, Meena. So when finally, I could get in touch with you, and you agreed. In fact, it was it was a very warm moment for me. It was a very warm moment for me, and we are very happy to have you for this lecture series. We have representations from practically this all over the country. So it's a large constituency which you will be addressing. We also have people from different locations. So with these few words, now I'll request Dr. Sangeeta Desai to introduce Meena, to introduce, I'm sorry, there's some noise somewhere, to introduce the speaker. So over to Dr. Sangeeta Desai. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Putul Sathe. A very warm welcome from the Research Center for Women's Studies, SNDT Women's University. We are in the 4th week, and today is the 12th session of this month-long series on gender sensitization and capacity development program organized by RCWS in collaboration with UGC. Today, our esteemed speaker is Meena Seshu. She is the founder of Sangram, Sampada Gramin Sanstha, established in 1992, which is aimed at empowering sex workers. Towards this goal, she has also set up VAMP, Vaishya Anyay Mukti Parishad, a collective led by people in sex work. Seshu's outstanding work with Sangram led Human Rights Watch to honor her in 2002 with the Human Rights Award. She works tirelessly for safety and removal of occupational hazards in sex work, and the hazards are many, such as violence, unsafe conditions and practices, and she wants sex workers to have access to treatment for sexually transmitted infections like HIV. She is known to have taken tough stands when in 2005 she decided that Sangram would not support the US government policy on the anti-prostitution pledge. Her work is focused on decriminalization of sex work. She believes rehabilitation efforts can be misguided, and her study, which has been published in EPW, also proves that, wherein framing trafficking as an issue of morality wrongly assumes no woman would enter sex work of her own volition. So we are eager to hear the voices from the ground and that sex work is a decent work. Just a request to the participant, please mute your audios and videos while the session is on. This session will be for 40 minutes approximately, followed by 10 minutes for question and answers. Welcome, Meena Seshu.
Thank you. Okay, so this is, I'm doing this via presentation because I just thought that, some people can even read what I'm presenting, and I think that actually helps everyone. I'm also very, very conscious of people who live with disabilities, and so chances are we may have participants who cannot hear or who cannot see, and so I have always felt that the best way to do a presentation of this kind is to do it visually. So let me start. As you see in the first slide, this is, we are part of an organization called Sangram, which was started about 27 years back. We are also part of a collective of sex workers called Vaishya Anyay Mukti Parishad. There is a collective of male and transgender sex workers, and they are called Muskan. And we are also part of what is known as the National Network of Sex Workers, which works in 7 states in this country. And just as we believe that the grassroots should inform and the ideas should scale up from the grassroots, we have also moved into the South Asian space where in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and India, we have set up what is known as the Sex Workers and Allies South Asia. So let me start with Sangram. Sangram is an umbrella organization. It's an NGO. It's a non-governmental NGO. It's a health and human rights NGO. And we deeply, deeply believe that ordinary people can change things. They just have to believe in it. and they can reclaim rights. The way the organization is set up to work is that we work with groups that are marginalized because of their sexual preference, because of their sexual behavior, because of their sexual work, because of their caste, because of their religion. So we are an NGO that works with these groups. What we do, of course, is we try to work with them in such a way that they get a voice and that they collectivize and that they are able to articulate their problems and they can actually resolve their own solutions. So we have worked with sex workers, female sex workers in VAMP, male and trans sex workers in Muskan. Vidrohi Mahila Manch is a organization, is a collective that is formed in Sangli district, and the women are largely from the Dalit community. We have Nazariya, which works with Muslim women specifically. There is VAMP Plus, which works with people who are living with HIV who are in sex work. And so, and we also have a group of children of sex workers, which is called Mitra. So essentially, it's an umbrella organization that works with marginalized communities, and it believes that the grassroots should inform policy, and therefore, from the grassroots, you take the lessons and take it through the Center for Advocacy on Stigma and Marginalization, which is CASAM, right up to global levels, national levels, state levels, regional levels. Okay, so since this is about sex work, my talk today is going to talk about sex work. And what is sex work essentially? We must understand that sex work is just for sex workers a provision of a service. Like a massage parlor, like a spa, sex workers just give a service. There is this unnecessary understanding of sex workers that do deha vikri, or those who sell bodies, or even sell sex. And I remember when we were doing translation from English, because a lot of the global sex worker movement believes in this understanding of selling sex. But when we were trying to do this translation, we realized that this colonial project of selling something, and selling sex especially, was not really something that the local workers that we were working in could understand, or even for them to feel comfortable with. And that's when we asked them, then what do you do? What would you like to say you do? It is then that we came to the understanding that they believe that they provide a sexual service, and that this sexual service can be given directly, it can be given through third parties, or it can be given through people who are client procurers who get clients for these women. So that's how this word came about, of providing sexual services. We know that sex work does not enjoy any kind of social sanction. And most people who are in sex work struggle just for livelihood and to exist. In fact, in the migrant population in any country, within the country, across borders, women in sex work are a huge, huge part of the migrant population. But this is not recognized. And why are they invisibilized? Why is this not recognized? Why is this not seen as migrant workers? One is because of the stigma associated with sex work. The perception is that women are catering to an immoral demand. So the demand that they are providing a service to is an immoral demand, and that actually has a huge, huge impact on how sex work is viewed, and the stigma, and then therefore the discrimination that the people in sex work face. We also know that just the fact that they exist as sex workers means that there is sexual exploitation, there's physical exploitation, that it could be slavery-like practice. This language that surrounds people who work in sex work is something that actually contributes for them not being able to express themselves or give voice to the work that they do. Who are these people? They are female sex workers, there are transgender people in sex work, and there are male sex workers. Mostly we see female sex workers in Maharashtra. Mostly we see them as brothel-based sex workers. They are migrants. They're also contract workers. So they contract themselves into any place. They may stay for a long period of time in one area, or they may move, because for them, movement actually helps them get more clients. And so this governs their need to migrate constantly. There are other reasons also why they migrate. They may have got into a violent relationship with a person. They may have issues with brothel owners. They may have issues with police. Police have started recognizing that they're in sex work. So they start hounding them. And then the women believe that the safest and the best thing to do is to move to the next place. They practice on the street. They practice in lodges. They practice in hotels, small hotels. We've seen them in dhabas along the highways. So sex workers, especially from towns that live close by to the highways, you see them a lot in the dhabas that are dot the highways. Transgender people also are mostly street-based, and they also work on the highway. There are a lot of people who work on the highways. In fact, transgender people, you'll see them doing both. You'll see them begging and providing sexual services. So you see them doing what they call mangti. Begging is such a sorry, horrible word. For the transgender people, it's called mangti, and the word itself has got lots of dignity, unlike begging. Male sex workers who provide services to other men, they're also all over. We don't see male sex workers in the brothels, but we see them in home-based and on the highways a lot, and on the street a hell of a lot. Sorry for the language. But there are a small group of male sex workers who also provide sexual services to women. They're a negligent number, but they exist, which is never ever, understood as work. So the Sangram model has been collectivization. For us, the mantra is collectivization. So what did we do? We started as a HIV/AIDS program. So if you can look at the middle of this slide, we are on the border of Maharashtra and Karnataka. That is the field of our operation. We started off with educating clients, educating workers, doing a peer-based program where the workers themselves would go and educate their clients, and training. So it was on condoms, use of condoms. We were looking at HIV, what HIV does. We were looking at sexually transmitted infections. And when we were doing this, we realized that just teaching women all of this is of no use if they don't have access. So we had to work then on right to health. They need to have access to treatment, access to services. Civil hospital was not very kind to them. And so collectivization, the model then became the model that could push the civil hospital doctors to actually provide treatment for opportunistic infections those days. And then, we realized that there was a lot of violence. So why were women not able to use condoms? Why were they not able to be safe? Because they were living and working in extremely unsafe working conditions. One of the major parts of that unsafe working condition was coming from actually violence. So it was violence from the police, violence from criminal gangs. If you're living on the margins, if society throws you out to live in the margins, and when you're living on the margins, what actually happens is the margins automatically attract what is termed as antisocial elements. And so forget about the state criminalizing you, the environment is deeply criminalized by everyone that you're living and working in. And though that contributes a lot to the unsafe working conditions, the other problem that the sex workers had is financial insecurity. This meant that if a client came and told you, I'll give you 100 rupees more, can you service me without a condom? Chances were very high that would happen. And we realized that if you have a collectivized model, if you organize sex workers, if there's an empowerment link over there, then women learn give themselves a lot of self-worth, because we had to work a lot on self-worth in the beginning when we were working, because all the women totally bought into mainstream understandings that sex work is bad, they're evil women, they're immoral women. And so therefore their need to live with dignity, their need to fight for dignity was very much compromised. And we realized that if we need to work with sex workers, then the freedom to live and work will have to be instituted by the workers themselves. And that could happen with strengthening them through this model of collectivization. So we had this community empowerment approach. This actually is a slide that came out of the UNFPA, WHO, UNDP, World Bank, who picked up this from Sangram, from our model, and have put it into what is known as the SWIT2, which is the comprehensive HIV/STI programming with sex workers, practical approaches for collaborative interventions. Because we decided that the way to do this is to actually have very clear understanding of what is happening with the sex workers. What is the work that is done with the sex workers? So developing the collectives was very, very important. Promoting a human rights framework within these collectives was very important. Then just forming the collective is not enough. You have to strengthen the collective. So a lot of training has to be given, a lot of information has to be given. And then to create an enabling environment. So how do you work with the police to create an enabling environment from petty criminals, from police atrocities, from all of that? And then once this collective movement is formed, how do you sustain it? How do you strengthen it? So we sort of worked on this modeling, and it was picked up by the WHO. Collectivization for justice means what for us? What is empowering sex workers? What does it mean? First of all, I think it is to recognize sexual labor within and outside of a commercial context. Now, this is something that is highly contested. Like domestic labor many years back, nobody thought that women in the houses actually work because they never looked at it as domestic labor. Similarly, for sexual labor, and I'm talking about within marriage, outside marriage, in relationships, in any kind of intimate spaces, sexual labor is not recognized. There is this understanding that sexual labor comes out of the labor of love. It does, but many times it doesn't. And when do we recognize that? And how do we recognize that? I have talked to many, many, many women who have come out of very, very problematic relationships, maybe marriage, maybe intimate relationships, maybe relationships that are extramarital. And invariably, the point is, you will find that they are talking about the fact that they were used sexually, and nobody ever recognized that sexual labor. So we thought that empowering sex workers means we need to talk about sexual labor. Sorry about that. We also realized that it has to be self-organization. And this was for self-determination. We cannot determine. I remember while working with this woman called Aprao Maushi in Sangli, she said, what do you know about sex work? Have you ever been a sex worker? What is your understanding? And I said, I agree with you. If we need to talk about self-determination, then it has to be done by the workers themselves. An outsider from the sex work community cannot suddenly hope to understand the realities of the sex work community. And unfortunately, of course, all of us in this meeting today have a definite idea about sex workers. Have you ever met them? Have you ever worked with them? Have you ever talked to them? Is something that the moral debates don't allow you to even think about. Everybody has a very strong opinion about what sex work is and whether sex work should exist or not exist. And so we thought that the best way to do it is to organize sex workers, to give them a voice so that they could determine and tell everybody or tell the world what they think of their work. Of course, there is nothing that can happen without cross-movement dialogues. And we realized that mutual solidarity is only possible with cross-movement dialogues. We did a rights-based approach, right? Because the rights-based approach meant what? That when we were running programs with sex workers, we did not run programs for sex workers. We ran programs that were with sex workers because we deeply believe that they have a right to formulate policies that affect their lives. Because if they didn't do that, then we have no right to sit down and decide about their life and what policies are affecting their lives. We also believe that collective wisdom gave great depth to policy. So whenever women in sex work talked to policymakers, whenever women in sex work went and as a collective approached people who were writing policies, writing laws about them, their collective wisdom had a huge, huge impact on the policymakers. Unfortunately, there is this narrative that all the women are victims of exploitation, slavery, servitude. They're all pushed into sex work. So therefore, they don't have a voice or they don't have a legitimate voice. And what happens is that people who are offering sexual services of their own volition are pushed to the margins. And their voices are not heard in the debates about themselves. And this had to change. So thus the rights-based approach. This led us, of course, from Vaishanya Mukti Parishad in South Maharashtra, North Karnataka, to the National Network of Sex Workers, which now has 1.5 lakh members in 7 states. But this network is the only network in India that has female, male, and transgender members who are in sex work. And we have a big office in Delhi, which helps coordinate, which helps advocate with the central government. And we were registered as the new network of sex workers very recently because when we went for registration, we realized that nobody in this country can register, except government, can register the word national. National means Government of India. And so then we made it the new network of sex workers. Let me talk about COVID-19 and what COVID-19 has done to sex workers. Unfortunately, sex workers have had paying the biggest brunt because livelihood is a huge, huge issue. And we know that sex work is done through physical contact. And physical distancing seems to be the only prevention. And we know that livelihood compulsions of sex workers would not allow them to not work. So how are these people going to manage this? Total ban on human movement. We know that beauty parlors, massage parlors, hairdressing salons, barbers, all of them face this. And all of them are fighting for livelihood and creating situations, masks, they're using sanitizers, they're using shields. But you know, sex work is a little different. And so the whole discussion on how can you be safe while doing sex work, is it possible to be safe? And I must tell you that when we started the discussion on COVID, because these are organized networks, because they are collectivized, because they collectivized around HIV, one of the first questions the women asked me was, what is the mode of transmission of this new disease? Ye corona ka mode of transmission kya hai? And I was like, you know, it is such an interesting question because they're thinking HIV. For the mode of transmission for HIV, then we need to take care of body fluids. They knew this. So if this is a virus, then please tell us. And then there was all these discussions on what could be safe sex. They moved into trying to do internet sex, many of them. They had a lot of problems with that. In fact, in Karad, we have a case as I speak in court because one of the clients took a video of this woman and just put it out everywhere. And so these are the problems that they're looking at in terms of internet safety. And the other problem, of course, I don't think it's problem so much, but the point is that it has to be figured out how to do it because many clients use the internet to talk to them, WhatsApp and everything, but did not pay them. So now they're trying to figure out that if it's a client of this kind, how do you organize payment such that they don't get duped? by clients. The other problem, of course, is that in this, any client can immediately include in a WhatsApp, say, 5, 6 men. And so then these women started feeling very violated because they had this thing to work with this one client, and suddenly they were looking at 5 or 6 clients, or 5 or 6 clients were looking at them. And so these things have to be worked out. They will have to look at internet safety. They will have to look at how they're going to work out working safely during COVID-19. The sex work profession is actually, I've always been saying this, is very similar to the medical profession today. The risk of getting COVID-19 is as high for people who are working, sanitation workers who don't work with PPEs, medical, class 4 employees who are not getting access to PPEs, sometimes doctors who are not getting access to PPEs and losing their lives. So this is something that the sex worker movement, this is new, this is the new normal, like it is for all of us, and this is something that we are grappling with. What happened, of course, the minute lockdown happened, the sex workers started telling us, what do we do? What do we do for people who are living with HIV? How do we get them antiretroviral treatment? And then the negotiations with the National AIDS Control Organization started, the negotiations with the Maharashtra State AIDS Control Society started. They have first line drugs, second line drugs, and third line drugs. But the third line drugs were not available locally. The local civil hospital was not giving it to them. So Sangram and VAMP, both using the Human Rights Law Network lawyers, went to court, went to Mumbai, went to court, and HRLN was able to get a order on our behalf saying all third line drugs will be available locally, just like first and second line drugs. And that was a huge victory, because that did not mean only Sangli and Satara. It meant all of Maharashtra. And that was something that was picked up for the rest of India. So now third line drugs are available. Nobody has to go to the main center, the big city, to get third line drugs. What are our worries? What are we challenged by? Our challenge is that, will the system provide hospital beds if people who are in sex work fall ill? Don't forget that sex workers are marginalized not only because of the work they do, but also because of the caste that they belong with, because of the class they are in. So hospital beds, if there is a fight for a hospital bed, will it ever be given to a sex worker? Will they be prioritized even if they deserve it medically? This is a question that we are grappling with. Today in Sangli, Satara, Kolhapur, we are really grappling with hospital beds. And it is a huge nightmare we are going through at this time and as I speak today. We're also wondering, if a vaccine comes, if a drug comes, will they prioritize sex workers like other contact professions? Because other contact professions I know will be prioritized. They'll say, you people need to get this drug on priority basis because of the work you do. But since sex work is so deeply stigmatized, will this be done? I'm not so sure. And that is something that is also an issue when and if a magic drug or vaccine will be created. So in India, organized sex workers, they did the surveys themselves because nobody is willing to come, no? And even do any relief for them. They don't have papers. Government does not, in the first month, the government didn't do any assistance. In fact, even till today, we don't have government assistance for many because they don't have government citizenship papers. They are people who normally leave their families, their natal families or their marital families because of some problem, and they come into sex work. When they come into sex work, those families throw them out, don't give them any papers. So there is no question of having a ration card. They have been able to get Aadhaar cards, but ration cards is a nightmare for most people in sex work. Also, they migrate so much for work. So again, the ration card thing doesn't work. As a result, they didn't get assistance. But these people are organized. They are collectivized. They actually went home to home, They looked at amount of people there. They made a grouping of 3 groups. The first group they did was people who need cooked food, because either they don't have a house, or they're living with a disability, or they don't have the means to be able to cook. So cooked food. The other group was groceries will work. You just give groceries, they'll cook their own food. And the third group was people who don't need assistance at this point in time, that they have some savings. Hello? Hello? Should I continue? Hello?
Who is this? Hello?
Yeah, should I continue? It's just getting over.
Yeah. No. Yeah, please. So, yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Thank you. So, you know, the sex workers themselves, because they know this, they know that they're the last in the line. And therefore, they collectivized, they did their surveys. They actually had to go and work with the grocers, get the grocery into packets, organize trucks, go in the truck themselves and do the distribution themselves. And that actually is the story of sex workers in India, because they are considered immoral workers, because they're so deeply stigmatized, because the discrimination is so high, they have to work for themselves. How much can an NGO do? What they want, of course, and they're the best educators of their male clients. I've been saying this since HIV, that we have found that they're the best educators of male clients. If I look at the initial stages of men who used to come into the counseling clinic with HIV, and we used to keep asking them, you know, why did you not tell your wife? Having HIV, why did you not use a condom with her? Why are you both in this mess today? Why are we looking at parent-to-child transmission of HIV? And most clients would just keep quiet. And I would keep saying, how come you men are able to, the sex workers are able to make you use condoms, but you are not willing to do the same for your own families? What is the issue here? This is something that has deeply, deeply always been something that has affected me personally, this question. And even in COVID-19, we are seeing this. We are seeing that male clients are continuing to come and the women are sending them away. They're telling them, listen, there is this thing called Corona. You can get it from me. I can get it from you. And this is the interesting paradigm that we're working in as I speak. We need government to take decisive steps to resolve all the issues that the lockdown and post-lockdown, post-COVID situation, or the present COVID situation, but post-lockdown situation has created for this community. We advocated with the Women and Child Department, and they did issue a letter, but it's only an advisory. It is not compulsory. And so we took the advisory, and in that they've said very clearly, Je Veshya Vyavasay Karat Ahit. So it is for people who are presently in sex work, people who have been rescued from sex work, who have been rehabilitated from sex work, Jancha Sutka Zaliye, they've used the word. All of them should get grocery from the local district collector. But this is somehow not being followed. And when you go to the district collector's office, they'll tell you, madam, this is just a government advisory. It is not mandatory. And so we are sorry, we don't have any help to give you. We need government to step in. We need government to look at the fact that there are many undocumented migrant workers who are left out of all the schemes that the government has. And these schemes are for these women who are on the margins. But somehow to get these schemes is becoming a nightmare. We also need the government to recognize the outreach and relief work that has been done by the community till today. And this recognition means that sex work has to be recognized. That is our struggle. All along, our struggle has been to recognize and grant status of a worker to a sex worker. We need to understand that social perception must change. If Justice Verma could write to us and tell us that when he was doing the criminal law amendment, he did not want to include, we have it in writing from him, sex workers of their own volition and their clients. This came from a government set up panel, but somehow this does not get translated. We need to make sexual service providers as part of our society. We need to understand that they are workers and that they have a right to be Laingik Shramik. That is our fight, is for self-work and dignity. We believe that we should be given trade union rights. Unfortunately, this is denied because we are not recognized as workers. And so every time in India, at least in 6 places, in 4 states, groups are already organized, they're already collectivized. But when they go to register as a trade union, they have been denied registration. And this is all connected to the fact that nobody thinks that this is decent work. And when I talk about decent work, I mean the ILO standard of decent work. And the ILO, if you look at sex work, actually it fits the ILO standard of decent work. It absolutely fits the ILO standard of decent work. But unfortunately, social perception does not allow. For instance, social perception in India is that sex work is illegal, when it is not. Sex work is not illegal. Everything around sex work is illegal and criminalized. And therefore, the demand of the sex worker rights movement is decriminalization. And what does decriminalization mean? It means stop criminalization. Because you can only decriminalize if you're criminalized. So what the demand is, this criminalized setup that is there, please stop it. Please remove it from the law such that we can live and work with dignity. Thank you so much. I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this session, for bringing in so many points and for helping us to understand the nature of sex work. And we like the mainstream narrative, which is again of slavery, servitude, forced into the trade. And but sex work, as you said, is like any other work, and sexual labor is a form of labor, and the need to decriminalize it. Thank you for reflecting so many important points. We have questions for you. Can we begin?
Yeah, I'll just stop sharing so people can. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the first question is from Sanil, and can you reflect upon what kind of class and caste women get into sex work?
See, the point is that when we did the Pan India survey with Pune University, actually, Rohini Sahni and Kalyan Shankar, they did this Pan India survey of sex workers. And they found that then it was about 64% came from the Dalit community. And the rest were from the other communities. And my understanding is that this is mainly because of the fact that the Dalit community has been denied education, they have been denied social status, they have been denied work status. And so most of the women that I work with, unfortunately, are not even literate, which means that they have been denied even literacy. And therefore, I feel that the communities that have been denied by society traditionally all the benefits of living in a society, those communities are the ones that we see in sex work a lot, which is the other community. The other community I see a lot in sex work is those who have had to leave from their families. Either it was a violent husband, or it was a marriage that she was not interested in, or it was running away from, sexual harassment in the house, maybe a father, maybe sexual abuse by some relative, maybe she got pregnant. This is another group that is there in the sex work community that I see. The third group that I see is married women. I see a lot of married women who are here to make ends meet. And sometimes I feel really terrible for them, because these women, when we were giving out relief, though they are part of our what we call registration for the targeted intervention that we run with the HIV/AIDS targeted intervention we run for the Maharashtra State AIDS Control Society, they said, we cannot come and take relief from you, because if we come, we'll get outed in our families. And this is the truth. In fact, there was a study by Harvard and Yale that said that, you know, they had done a brothel study virtually, and that the brothels will be the places where COVID-19 is going to, you know, overtake India. And when we were looking at that, I went to Maharashtra State AIDS Control Society and said, please give me a list of how many are brothel based, how many are street based, how many are home based. And you will be surprised to note that the brothel based are the tiniest in this group that Maharashtra government is working with through the targeted intervention program. And most of these people on the street, most of these people are married women. Most of these people are married men who are servicing services to other men. So I'm just saying that the class actually comes from the fact that they don't have an education, that they belong to a particular kind of caste, because the money they earn is not valued. And so even if they're actually quite rich, they still cannot occupy a class, you know, in society. And this is their reality. I hope that has answered some of the questions.
Thanks. And how do you define dignity in the context of sex work?
Good question. I don't. I think the construct of dignity comes from the workers themselves. When they found that they were treated so badly by the civil hospital, but collectivization helped them actually negotiate that the class 4 employee, the doctor, does not throw them out, does not make them stand outside or treat them last. The police station gives them a chair in the police station, because that was denied them. They were treated like pariahs. I'm sorry to say this, but I have seen this. There were rapes and murders in these communities of women, which nobody, no local women's rights activist was even willing to pick up. The media also didn't pick it up. I have seen this with my own eyes. That is dignity for them. The fact that they're treated as human beings, because nobody ever thought that people in sex work, women in sex work, were human.
Thank you. Can you share some information or about the struggles and challenges faced by the transgender sex workers, especially during COVID times?
It's not only during COVID time. You know, transgender sex workers face a lot of problems. One is, don't forget that, you know, they are the most visible people. Anywhere a transgender cannot become invisible, because they have created a situation in them that actually visibilizes them to society. Their behavior also attracts a lot of attention, but we have never ever recognized the transgenders till very, very recently. We never recognized that these people actually exist in society. So the transgender fight has been the fight for recognition as a group who have a legitimate right to live in this world. And I'm talking about the world, I'm not talking about India alone. So the transgender fight for dignity, this transgender fight for life, the transgender fight for livelihood is much more complex than just the sex work piece of it.
Okay, thank you. Prachi wants to know what happens to the children. What about the children of sex worker? Any kind of relief for them? And similarly, its second question is also regarding the children of sex worker. Are they given admission in all schools? I think, can we see Meena Sheshu? Has she got locked out?
No, she's not seen.
I can see her, Sangeeta. She's there. Meena? We just wait for her. Has she?
No, she's not here, I guess, because of.
We can't hear you.
Actually,
Meena, hello. I
Actually,
can
she's
see
out of.
Meena.
Now she's here. Yeah, now she has come.
Hello, I think
Yes,
I
now
lost
I.
connectivity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lost connectivity.
No problem. No problem. So
Yeah.
there were two questions regarding the children of sex workers. The first one is any kind of relief is given to them, and the second is are they given admission in all schools?
Yeah, they are. And it's a good question because we have a huge group of children of sex workers who we work with. And the reason why we work with is because the sex workers themselves told us that we need to work with children because children are living a much worse life than the sex workers themselves. So we have Mitra, which is a children of sex workers group. And in fact, as I speak today, we have one person who, 1 second, I think yeah, there are too many. Okay. Yeah.
Your voice is muted.
Everybody.
Voice
Yeah.
is muted.
No, somebody muted me. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
somebody,
think
the host muted you. Yeah, the host muted you by mistake.
Yeah. So just let me finish this. So we have actually encouraged children of sex workers to get higher education. As we speak today, we have engineers. We run a hostel in Nippani for 40 children, where we educate children of sex workers. In this COVID situation, of course, this year we've closed the hostel. But we have one of our workers' children who has appeared for NEET, got into Jalgaon Medical College, and is at this, as we speak, on the 3rd year of medical college. So, and this was an uphill task because nobody is willing to give sex workers' children a caste certificate. No, everybody asks me the caste issue, but we are so upset because children of sex workers don't get caste certificates because they ask you for 50 years lineage papers, which they don't have. Because this girl did so well, we went to the highest authorities and with great difficulty, we got her a caste certificate such that her mother could continue her education without having to pay too much for it. And so this girl really helped. She got 96.4% in the 12th standard. And this was staying in our hostel without any kind of coaching, without anything. Today we have another woman, another child like that, who has done very well in her 10th and now has got into the 11th and 12th in Nippani. And we hope that we can follow her through too. We've had a couple of engineers. Engineering seems to be easier than getting through NEET, of course. But this is our reality. This is what we've been doing. And we are saying at least, we have 3 nurses from children of sex workers who we have mentored, paid for their education. And we will continue to do this. The point is that the children of sex workers need mainstream society to help them get, educational loans, to get educational, to get the caste certificates. And somehow this is, I've talked to so many Dalit leaders, but this is something that has not happened to date. Yes.
So next question is again related to caste. How does the caste system affect the work of sex workers, and does the caste of these workers affect the clients?
It doesn't, that is the big fun of this whole thing. When the client comes, neither is his caste, nor his religion, nor his class, nothing is looked at. Neither does the client look at it, nor does the worker look at it. Also, don't forget that most workers will not give you their real names. When they are in business, they always have, you know, to use other names because they're worried that families will come to know, something else will happen. And this affects them. And therefore, or their children. Many of them work without the knowledge of their children. And so mostly the workers don't tell the clients their name. I have seen, in fact, there was Bimawa Gollar. I'll never forget her. She's passed on. But she had 3 children with 3 different names. So there was a Mujawar, there was a Jain, and there was a Gullar. Because whichever Malak she had at that point in time, the child had that name. So it's also people that who they have as lovers, who they call Malaks. They also come from all castes and all religions. And this is the reality, the diverse reality within which sex work is practiced in this country.
Thank you. We have a number of questions actually coming up. There are so many countries which has legalized sex work. So what are the reasons that Indian government is not doing so?
See, I think that, you know, the demand for sex work from the sex worker rights movement is not legalization. It is decriminalization. And there's a reason for that. Legalization, we have seen everywhere, is actually to control the sex workers, not to give them freedom. So what is happening? First of all, most police will say, do you have a license? And you know, sex workers are not getting into sex worker thinking, kal se main sex work karungi, jaake license leke aungi. So that has become a big issue. Second thing is zoning, because you'll get a license only for one area. That means all your movement is curtailed. Third thing is mandatory health checkup. So that again, so you know, it's basically license Raj, which we all know and how it works. So the demand of the sex workers' rights movement today is that till society recognizes sex work as work and gives us the space with dignity, we will just ask for decriminalization of sex work. Because that way, there is some level of freedom we will have while practicing sex work. So legalization is not the demand. And the legalization, there are legal, and there are, you know, different kinds of legal systems. It's not only just this one license kind of system that exists. There are many, but the stigma doesn't go away. Do you remember reading, there was this story in the middle where I think it was the German government or somebody who said that people who don't have work, since sex work is one of the lists of work, women who are not in sex work, who've never been in sex work, that's an option they should take. And this just broke in the world. So the point is that sex work as an intimate space of work, because it creates this, the space of work itself is in mostly intimate spaces, because sex is practiced in a very intimate space. This kind of work will always attract a lot of state and societal regulation, which could also mean state and societal violence. So the demand has always been decriminalization. At least don't criminalize us such that we can live and work with freedom. I hope that answered it.
Yes, thanks. You did mention that.
Sangeeta,
yes.
Sangeeta, let us take all the questions because there are many questions I can see.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of the some of them have given 3-4 questions, so I think it makes sense to. Okay. Yeah. So NGOs are criticized for romanticizing the plight of sex workers and for exaggerating the plight of women for the interest of sexist, misogynist, capitalistic trade. What's your take on such criticism?
Well, since I've been the center of this criticism for many, many years now, I can tell you that the criticism sometimes to me feels almost like, you know, a criticism that is leveled because it makes intellectual, it makes intellectual sense. Ground reality is very different. And therefore, you know, to fit this into an intellectual argument, because that's the intellectual argument that appeals to us, is something that the sex workers have rejected. The reason why, even in my talk, I said, we are unwilling to listen to people who are in sex work. I remember once a woman told me, Madam, Ami Dalitancha Dalite. And I said, what do you mean by this? And she said, you know, I went for this meeting, which was with talking about issues of Dalit. For the whole day, the first day, there was all this discussion about how you Savarna women treat Dalit women. And I totally agreed with them. But then when I wanted to speak, they didn't allow me to speak. And then I told them that, you know, what you people have done is just like the Savarna women treated Dalit women, you all are treating me. Because the problem, I think, is that the voice of these people who practice sex work is the one that is not given legitimacy. If that is done, then maybe there will be a different space within which all this is discussed. At this point of time, the discussion is about them, not with them. And unless we can do that with them, this criticism will continue. And women will continue to live this life on the margins because this criticism in and of itself will not allow them to enter mainstream society.
Thank you. What are the measures that you can suggest for students of women's studies can do to help bridge the gap of looking at sex worker as a worker per se? There must be some examples of work done successfully in this direction in India or abroad.
There has been, there has been. In fact, the feminist movement in India, the autonomous feminist movement in India has actually responded and has responded with great understanding, because the feminists, I think, are trying to talk to sex workers, actually listen to the women, and try and see if something can be formulated with the women that is addressing this issue. There are women's studies groups. There's a lot of research coming out now, both abroad and in this country. There are groups that are working on trafficking, who are actually looking at sex work as work, because what happened with the trafficking discourse is that it became an abolitionist discourse. And therefore, the way to deal with trafficking was to abolish sex work. It's like the way to deal with domestic violence within marriage is to abolish marriage, which nobody is, of course, accepting as a solution, right? When you have bonded labor, you want to release the bonded laborer, but you don't stop the work of construction. You don't stop the work that the bonded laborer was doing. You don't ban that. But in sex work, that is what has happened. The solution has always been, because sex work is so mired in the moral, immoral debates, and because it is sex and sexuality that is considered such a sacred, intimate space that nobody can actually work with it commercially. There have been a lot of scholars, women's studies scholars, who have engaged with the issue of sex work and are bringing out a lot of good material now, actually engaging with sex workers, talking to them, and trying to bring their voice out into the open.
Thank you so much. Any kind of help which is given by the government for sex workers in COVID-19 pandemic? You did mention, but they were not getting the relief. That's what in your talk you did.
Yeah, I mean, this is the point. Now, government gave an advice, but for you to go and get that relief, because Sangli is collectivized, we were able to get it in 2 sites in Sangli. But all over Maharashtra, we sent that letter everywhere. Nobody got it. So my whole point is this, ki you have to fight for what has been actually given to you as a right. That is the state in which sex work is today. And government recognition, actually government had what is called as an empower group. Government of India set up empower groups, 9 of them, to deal with various levels of relief work. And the empower group did approach Sangram. We did give them a note. The IAS officer called us and spoke to us. She even wrote a letter to government saying that, this is a group that actually should be addressed. But the point is that in reality, we haven't seen that.
Okay. Do we have data on the death rate of the sex workers during COVID? As you had already mentioned that the hospitals were denying them bed and
Scared of this. I am so scared of this. I've kept my fingers crossed. To date, we've had 3 women in Pune who were in sex work, who passed on. But in the whole national network of sex workers, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We haven't yet had a death. And I'm really keeping my fingers crossed.
okay. How do the children of sex workers view their mothers and their work?
It's a, you know, the ones that I work with. See, also don't forget that on this issue, I can't talk about the whole of the sex work world. I can only talk about the world that I work in, which is a small, minuscule Sangli, Satara, Kolhapur, Belgaum, Bagalkot area. But in this area, we've been able to work with children of sex workers who actually hated the fact that their mothers worked in sex work because they couldn't even say that they lived in these gullies where sex work is practiced. Even if they went to school, they never told their friends. Even if they went, if they were coming by bus, they got off 2 seats behind. I remember one woman telling me that she was studying for her 10th class exam and her own teacher came into the brothel where her mother was practicing, and she ran and ran and ran because she was so scared. And then when I asked her, I mean, she's an adult woman now, and I asked her, I said, you know, why did you run? That man had come to get serviced by your mother. Why didn't you think of him? And she said, you know what, even till today, my heart beats fast when I think of that incident, that my own teacher landed up in my brothel, but all I could think of was I was so ashamed to be there. So this is what society has done to this community. This is the meaning of marginalization. This is the meaning of denying them dignity. This is the way it works. It works in their mental status to such an extent that mothers are unwilling to go to the parent-teacher meetings. How many parent-teacher meetings I've attended? Till now, of course. But now, in the collective with WAMP, women go bedarak. They just go for the parent-teachers meeting, tell the teachers they're in sex work, and demand the right to education for their children. And that is something I've seen in these 27 years.
And do you think the children are vulnerable, or do you think that, I mean, are the children of sex workers also entering the sex work? And how can we prevent it?
Education, organizing them, that is one of the things. See, I think that also what happens with sex workers' children is, and this is my own experience, it could be just anecdotal, but I have seen that the kind of freedom that they're used to, most of these women will get their girls married. And, you know, not only get them married, will continue to take care of them also, you know, monetarily. But somehow I've felt that the adjustment within a marital home is something that is a huge problem for most of these girls. And they seem to be coming back. They're not coming into sex work, but they're not able to continue in marriages. And this is something I really want some women's studies person to take up and study as to why, you know, children of sex workers don't fit into the mainstream systems and institutions of societal living.
Thank you. You did mention about livelihoods getting impacted because of COVID. So is it that women in this profession now want to look for alternative professions or alternative livelihoods?
You know, there's a recent study that's going on for the past 2 days. We've been seeing that in Pune about a group that says that they're all looking for alternative livelihood. But I think that what they're looking for is supplementary income. Because their old clients, their regulars who they trust, they are actually getting back into sex work. And I can see that. But I think supplementary income now has become very, 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 very critical. So I don't think it's so much as an alternative livelihood as much as a supplementary income.
Okay. Thank you so much, Meena Sheshu, for this wonderful session, for engaging with the audience.
Sangeeta, sorry, Sangeeta, there's one question from Rohini. She's asking that how do you prevent children from entering this work?
No, she just took it right now. She just answered.
Okay, sorry.
I can even say it once more. The only way to prevent, I can just say it once more. The only way to prevent children, first of all, children in the sex trade is child sexual abuse. So there is no question of minor in sex work. It doesn't exist. That's rape. And that is definitely child sexual abuse. So as far as minors is concerned, we're very clear. How do you prevent children of sex workers becoming sex workers? By giving them an education, by ensuring that they get an education such that they're able to figure out what they want to do in life. If an adult comes into sex work via marriage, bad marriages, bad lovers, bad intimate relationships, that's all as adults. But to prevent children of sex workers getting into sex work, the best way to do it is to educate them, give them an education. Give them an education on a priority basis. Give them reservation, which nobody is willing to do. They're not even willing to give them caste certificates. So, फिर वो education कैसा होगा?
Okay. All right. Oh God, whatever.
Thank you so much. I think you have answered all of the questions. Puttul, I think we have covered all of the questions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think this can go.
Yeah. Now, can I request Dr. Puttul Sathe to please give vote of thanks to the speaker?
Yeah, I think there was some, there was some problem, I think, with my net. So finally, we come to the end of a very interesting session. Meena, thanks a lot. In fact, of course, this is just the beginning of our dialogue. I think since we do have a research component and an internship component as part of our MA, this syllabus, let's hope that some of our students, we can at least encourage, or at least, I mean, this talk would have motivated them to join. Because I think what you need is to actually have field experience. You know, I mean, this is just this is a very complex field. So on behalf of the Research Center for Women's Studies, I thank Meena Sheshu for a very powerful talk. And I hope that on behalf of the center, we can continue this. Dialogue. Meena, of course, when you come to Bombay, I hope you will be able to visit the center because basically Geeta is a regular visitor. So, I mean, of course, I'm taking on a very personal note. So on this note, we come to the end of this session. Thank you, Meena, and thanks to all the participants.